Time is tracking away and I wanted to get some videos out. The first one is on why I love the Springboks bench philosophy. Yes, we know Rasi and Nineveh have their own creative genius, and it is something that doesn't show itself in the same way as, say, a country like New Zealand or the All Blacks. They use the tools they've got to their best effect. And one of those ways is how they use their bench. But it's the larger philosophy that drives that. Not so much whether or not it's 7-1, 6-2 or 5-3, but what is driving why, the reason why. Ask or start with why, to quote a book. And it comes through, when you think about the bench historically, how it's been used, you want to cover. You want to cover the various positions. Some of them you have to, obviously, the specialist type positions. But there's also some freedom, but generally you're thinking that way. You don't realize it, but it is a negative way of conceiving. It is a bit part way of thinking, although talk went from the 15 to the 22, then the 23, it was still less of a cohesive sort of flow between those parts and a less a cohesive sort of philosophy. And I think that's what I see with the Springbok. There's a cohesive, positive philosophy that seeks to add to what they offer and not just thinking about, well, we need to cover the hooker, we need to cover the props, we need to cover the halfback. I mean, in one sense, if you want to take it into a larger range, and I don't know if this is something that will excite your interest, but it's easy to make decisions based on fear. In other words, for the things that may turn out. And I think that Rasi and Nineveh are not thinking that way. They're thinking about what they can possibly accomplish with the composition of their bench. And then those are totally different ways of thinking. And if you know if in your own life, if you think through, oh no, what will be? Or, you know, a fearful type response, that doesn't allow you to, it doesn't encourage, maybe is the better word. It doesn't encourage the type of existence that flourishes. It tends to be quite restrictive. It tends to be looking and seeing glass half empty all the time. Whereas the South African philosophy on their bench is glass half full. How can we use the 23, those on the bench, to add to what has gone on? And let's take the bench for the final with 7-1. And they know that they're, and it's not just a 7-1 actually. Victor Matfield pointed it out on New Zealand TV, that he was surprised that it wasn't a halfback or scrum half as the one back reserve or replacement. And so they're really rolling the dice. But what they're saying is the potential we need to do is to add much more. And I think in light of the quarter and the semi, I think they're looking and saying, okay, two tight contests, our guys, primarily our forwards, how we want to play. This is not only how we want to play and not only how we believe we can win, but this is maximizing our potential. And if something goes wrong, then we're willing to cover that. But should you have a philosophy that is thinking, well, if something goes wrong, then I'll do something about it, or then I've got covered there? Or should you be thinking, how can I make the most of this 23 players in my squad to try and beat the opposition? So I think one is the rainy day idea. And the likelihood is, well, who knows? It may be a rainy day in St. Denis, but may not happen. Maybe it will. They are taking a risk. And I think that's the other side of it. If you're going to do anything, it requires a risk. Whether or not you're going to play top line sport, or whether or not you're just going to put yourself out there on a viewing platform, whether it be whatever. However and wherever, it does require a quotient of risk and a vulnerability in light of that. And so they've said, this is how we believe we can win. Maybe they're thinking, well, if we just like go for the stock standard, then we're not actually maximising the one part of the game where we believe we can take the All Blacks down. Now, I'm not saying they can. I'm not getting into all those like practical questions. It's a larger philosophy that really speaks to me. And I think it speaks about life, how we look at life and how we look at the opportunities before us. Do we see the potential of what we can achieve if we get all the various parts, the moving parts, heading in a certain direction? Or are we hedging our bets? Are we just saying, well, I better do this and I better do that? And by hedging our bets, we don't actually give ourselves to what's before us with enough of an impetus, enough momentum, enough intentionality to get it across the finish line. So I love the all-in. I love the all-in philosophy of the Springboks in this Rugby World Cup final. Of course, as a Kiwi, a passionate All Black supporter, I hope it doesn't come to fruition, but I appreciate what it communicates about the team. And they communicate it. I looked at the press conference, Nina, but they talk about why they're doing. I mean, Vamane Labok, you're starting 10, now you're out. But he knows there's a reason why. They can see the reason why. So they're providing a plausibility or a warranted type structure. So I think that is, again, another we could talk about that type of like the communication and the sense of buy-in. But for me, I don't want to talk too long in this video, the bench for the Boks, the philosophy that undergirds it, the willingness to risk, the willingness to not live according to a what may be fearful philosophy, but saying, hey, we're going to be intentional and we're going to make it happen. If something goes wrong, then we believe our guys can cover it. That type of attitude demands celebration and is something that for all of us in our own lives, about being willing to give it everything, being intentional and seeking a certain goal and point of why we're doing what we're doing. And they have that. The players understand that. Whether or not it works out in the end, we'll see. But that intentionality is what we all need in our lives for us to maximise our moments and our potential. What say you? Your thoughts, your reflections? Maybe that's gone a little bit too, well, let's talk about the rugby detail, but I have a bit of a fascination and enjoyment on looking at these larger, wider, deeper realities that drive why we do what we do. And once we understand that, then we become more empowered to make it more intentional. What say you? I am Johnny King.